podcast, the Heidelcast.
It's a Heidel minicast. And now, Scott Clark.
So who was Daniel Featley?
If the Heidelcast helps you, won't you help us keep it going? Please make the coffer clink by clicking on the PayPal link or by sending a check to Heidelberg Reformation Association, 1637 East Valley Parkway, number 391, Escondido, California, 92027.
Usually at this spot, I'm asking you to do things, but in this one, I just want to encourage you to check out the Heidel shop. I think, in a way, we're doing something for you. Everybody needs clothing. Everybody needs cool stuff. At least we think it's cool. And you might find some of that stuff at heidelblog.net/shop. Shirts, hats, sweatshirts. I think we were going to add a dog dish or something, a pet dish, I guess. It could be used for a cat, maybe. I don't know. And lots of other stuff. Onesies, as the voice says, if you're into that sort of thing. And all kinds of things there. So check it out. It's nice stuff. The coffee mugs, I think, are particularly sharp. We have them for the Heidel blog and the Heidelcast, but we've got some nice T-shirts and ball caps, bucket hats, snapback hats. So if there's something that you don't see that you want, let us know and we'll work on it. Somebody recently said, hey, can you add some polos? So we're working on that. And by the time you hear this, they probably are up there, and some other kinds of shirts as well. So just having some fun and offering some nice stuff. It's a nice way to support the Heidel blog. We just get a little bit of that to cover our overhead. And mainly it's just a way to let people know that you're listening to the Heidelcast, reading the Heidel blog, and supporting the Heidelberg Reformation Association. And for that, we say thank you.
The Heidelcast.
In this episode, this is part 3 of Featley, the Sweet Dipper. We want to look at the life of Daniel Featley. Today, under the influence of the Marxists, we would call William Kiffin a working class guy who became successful. His opponent in the 1642 debate, featured in Dipper's Dipped, Daniel Featley, 1582 to 1645, was also a working class fellow. He was born in Oxford, but we might say that though he was in Oxford, he was not of Oxford. His father was not a tutor or a respected minister, but a servant in Magdalen College and later a cook at Corpus Christi, another college in Oxford. Boys from the working class, the children of porters, the men who greet students in the college gatehouse, scouts, the people who clean up after the students in college, and cooks do not typically get to attend Oxford. They don't expect to become members of parliament. They expect to become porters, scouts, and cooks themselves. But young Daniel was able to go to school and then win a place as an undergraduate in Corpus Christi. He did so well that not only did he finish his degree, but he was made a probationary fellow in the college. In 1613, he earned his Bachelor of Divinity degree, roughly the equivalent of the modern MDiv degree, although I think it was maybe a little more rigorous, and was made a Doctor of Divinity in 1617. As a fellow in Corpus, he was made terrae filius, that is, an orator privileged to make humorous and satirical strictures in a public speech at the public act. Thus, unlike Kiffin, Featley, through his education, changed social classes and remained a lifelong Episcopalian royalist, even through his brief and turbulent tenure as a member of the Westminster Assembly and minister in the established church. Ironically, his new status did not confer upon him wealth. The successful entrepreneur Kiffin became wealthy, while Featley's financial fortunes were often rather less certain. In 1607, while at university, Featley was, quoting here, entangled in a conflict with an emerging anti-Calvinist faction at Corpus Christi, close quote. John Reynolds, who died in 1607, became what we might characterize as Featley's rabbi, that is, a senior scholar who aided Featley by assigning to him students to tutor, thus improving his income. Some of the anti-Calvinists in college however, wanted those students for themselves, and things became so difficult that Featley nearly lost his job. In the 1620s and 30s, he found himself at odds with another group, the Laudians. William Laud, who lived from 1573 to 1645, was a fellow and president of St. John's College, Oxford. And in 1630, under Charles I, he was made chancellor of the university. 3 years later, he was made Archbishop of Canterbury. He sought to make, quote, the communion table, rather than the pulpit, the center of the church, close quote. He suppressed the Reformed ministers in the Church of England and the dissenters, that is, the Congregationalists and the Presbyterians, and sought to impose the Book of Common Prayer and the Anglican liturgy on the Church of Scotland. Laud was an anti-Calvinist, sympathetic to the Remonstrants, and he did enough to anger his opponents that, in 1641, he was imprisoned in the Tower of London, tried, and convicted in 1644 and put to death the next year.
Ladies and gentlemen, Scott Clark.
One feature of Featley's career that deserves mention is his work as a member of the first Oxford Company of Translators of the Authorized Version of the Bible. This company translated the major and minor prophets. He served in a number of other capacities, including as chaplain to the ambassador of France and as chaplain to the Archbishop in London. Perhaps the most colorful and perilous chapter in Featley's career, however, was his brief tenure as a member of the Westminster Assembly. Remember that his opponent in the 1642 debate, Kiffin, was aligned with Cromwell and the parliamentary forces during the English Civil War. Featley was and remained a royalist, so it was a little odd that he was invited to sit at Westminster. But the invitation came at just the right moment and probably was an offer that, in that moment, he could not refuse. Remember, too, that during the war from January 1642, Oxford was the headquarters of the Royalists. Featley himself was attacked at his churches in Acton and Lambeth in 1642 and 1643. Some of his parishioners reported him to a parliamentary committee for introducing hated Laudian measures into the church. He was on trial for those charges when Parliament issued its summons to Featley to attend the Westminster Assembly. He took his seat on July 1, 1643, while the verdict of the trial was still pending. On July 11, he was acquitted on a vote of 69 to 60. As Greg Salazar said, quoting here, at the beginning of the English Civil War, one way for outspoken Reformed Royalist divines to avoid persecution was to declare allegiance to the parliamentarian cause by attending the Westminster Assembly. Close quote. Featley later said that though his body was in the Assembly, his heart was with the Royalists. Later, in prison, he wrote that he very much regretted accepting the invitation, but that had he not, he would have lost his income, his livings, entirely. How does a member of the Westminster Assembly end up in prison? The summons to the Assembly contained the same language as the Solemn League and Covenant, denouncing prelacy. Featley was a convinced Episcopalian in church polity, and so this language put the Episcopalians at Westminster in a difficult position. Apparently, numerous opponents used his opposition to the Solemn League and Covenant and his defense of episcopacy to get him arrested and jailed, but not without Featley's help. In 1643, a felt maker, Armiger Wardner, befriended Featley, as one writer says, and gave him a message ostensibly from James Ussher, who died in 1656, who was with the Royalists at Oxford. The message was supposed to indicate the king's displeasure with Featley's decision to sit at Westminster and insisted that he leave the Assembly. Featley, now caught between Parliament, who had just put him on trial, and his king, was initially puzzled why Ussher had not written to him directly instead of using Wardner as a go-between. But he decided that the message was legitimate. Wardner then offered to act as courier of a letter from Featley to Ussher. Featley sent a letter via Wardner to the king with a few lines about the work of the Assembly and his plan to leave the Assembly when it was possible to do so. Wardner, as you've probably already guessed, was no friend of Featley's, Ussher's, or the king's, but was strongly allied with the parliamentary forces. He gave the letter to parliamentary authorities who arrested Featley for being a royalist spy. It's been suggested that Featley's speeches defending episcopacy angered his opponents, who set up a sting operation. The result was that he was removed from the Assembly and jailed.
Heidelcast.
I would maybe spend some time here talking about the virtues or lack thereof of a state church, but let the listener understand. When not arguing with Romanists or Laudians, Featley also argued with the emerging Baptist movement. Remarkably, While he was in prison, he was not only allowed to write for publication, he was asked to do so by those who had jailed him, and he agreed to do it. His final prison work is the work under consideration in this series, The Dippers Dipped, 1645, and it was one of just a number of works published by Reformed writers against the Baptists in this period, which include Thomas Edwards' Gangrena. It's published in London in 1644, Robert Bailey's Anabaptism, the True Fountain of Independency, Brownism, and Antinomy, Familism, and the most of the other errors, which for the time do trouble the Church of England, unsealed, London, 1647. These writers, along with Ephraim Paget and Samuel Rutherford, warned of, in Paul Lim's words, an ecclesiastical slippery slope to anti-Trinitarianism. And by the way, that wasn't entirely fictional or hyperbole. A number of Anabaptists did actually become anti-Trinitarian. We'll consider the setting of the debate as reported by Featley in our next episode, but he had already engaged what he called the Anabaptists, not actually Anabaptists, of course, but Baptists, in 1620 when he encountered Elias Tukey at his residence in Lambeth. The Anabaptists considered Featley to be a great enemy, and he returned the favor. Dippers Dipped was also apparently stimulated by conversations he was having with his fellow prisoner, a General Baptist minister, who wrote a work against Featley and Stephen Marshall, who died in 1655, titled Antichrist Unmasked, which was published in London in 1645. Featley, in bad health, was allowed out of prison to go to Chelsea College in London in hopes of improving his health. 17th century English prison was no place for old men. He died of asthma and dropsy. That's excess fluid collecting in the cavities of the body, which caused extreme swelling. He died on April 17, 1645, and was buried at Lambeth Church. The historian Anthony Wood remembered him this way. He was esteemed by the generality to be one of the most resolute and victorious champions of the Reformed Protestant religion of any of his time. A smart scourge of the Church of Rome, a compendium of the learned tongues, and of all the liberal arts and sciences, and though small of stature, yet he had a great soul, and learning of all kinds compacted in him.
Thanks for listening. Tune in tomorrow for more from the Heidelcast, brought to you by Heidelberg Reformation Association.org. Don't forget, when the coin in the coffer clinks, the cost of bandwidth shrinks. Copyright Heidelberg Reformation Association. All rights reserved. This is a Heidel Media production.
The best podcast